Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Board Avengers. I'm your host today, D20 Woodworking, and today we're going to talk about it's kind of like a buyer's guide for Too Many Bones. If you follow me on my personal YouTube channel, D20 Woodworking, you know this is one of my favorite, if not my favorite game of all time. And I've had a few questions recently about kind of how to get into this game. There's a lot of content out there, right? It's expensive. There's a lot of different questions that come up, and I kind of wanted to go through bits and pieces of it and just talk about if you wanted to get into this game, what is a path or two of possible ways to buy content, right? So I guess before we really dive into things, we first need to have a very basic understanding of Too Many Bones, like very, 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 very basic, just because it will help explain why some of the content suggestions are the way that they are. So if you don't know, Too Many Bones is basically a dice building RPG game, and you get a sweet neoprene mat like this. Has a bunch of die cutouts, so you can put a die in there to increase your stats. You can do skills down here, lock different dice up in here, and each gear lock, which think of as your hero, right, has a player mat like that, and then they come with a bunch of dice and a chip to signify the character themselves. Now, I'm going to be showing you accessories and parts of a lot of different things. I own all the Too Many Bones stuff, so don't think of it all comes with like just the base game or anything like that. It's from a bunch of different things overall. So you select your hero. Then after you select your hero, you're going to select a tyrant. A tyrant is usually going to consist of cards like this, mainly a tyrant card in general. It will have a tyrant die and a tyrant chip, or maybe several dice and several chips. Then you're going to construct a deck of cards, which are known as basically your days, right? You're venturing throughout the lore, and you're venturing over a series of days, and you have to get a certain amount of points. Now, on the Tyrant card itself, shows you the amount of days. It shows you the amount of points that you need. And depending on how many days it is, that's how you construct basically your campaign, for more lack of a better word, right? It's a shorter campaign. Don't think of it as a campaign that take you many nights, but it's like a shorter campaign almost. So you have your starting cards, and then you have your rest of your cards, and your tyrant would go last. Now, once you get enough points, right, adventure points, as I mentioned before, you can challenge the tyrant. If you don't succeed in the amount of days that's allotted to you, you have failed the game. That is a very general overview of how this game works, but it's important to note that, and we'll get into that in a second. So a lot of people, when they first look into this game, they notice one of two things, and they're intertwined with each other. One is the component quality, right? As you saw, everything is neoprene matte. These are all PVC cards, so they're not normal paper cards. All the dice are extremely nice. The chips are weighted. They feel good. It all has a premium quality feel to it. And what comes when you get a premium quality feel? You get a premium price. So one of the big concerns with Too Many Bones is the price of the game. As of recording this video right now, the base game is $150. Undertow, which we're also going to talk about a lot, is $100. A lot of the character expansions and other expansions out there are each $30. And when people look at the collective sum of that, right? You're looking at something that if you were to go, let's say, all in on the last Kickstarter with a discount, we're talking about $1,100 for everything that's out there for it. And it scares a lot of people away. And I get it. It's a big chunk of change to put down. You don't know where to start. You don't know if you're going to fall too far behind, etc. So let's dive right into things. And let's talk about really the price and where to start. As of right now, because Unbreakable is not out. Unbreakable was the most recent campaign. We're not going to touch a lot of the stuff in the video because I don't know anything about it yet, right? I haven't played it. But there's two places you can essentially start. There is the base game of Too Many Bones, the $150 option, and then there's the standalone expansion, Undertow. Now, you'll get, depending on who you talk to, you'll get different suggestions of where to start. There isn't necessarily a best place to start. I like to think of it as where you're most comfortable to start. So we might as well talk about each one and the pros and cons of each one of why you should or should not start there. So let's start with the base game. Now, the base game, if you are breaking things down by the most bang for my buck, right, that I'm going to get the most playthroughs out of, the most combinations out of, you're looking at Too Many Bones, the base game in general. And the reason I say that is because Too Many Bones, the base game, comes with 4 gear locks, right? So the neoprene mats I showed you, all the dice and stuff, it comes with 4 different gear locks. Now, they are easier gear locks, and I put those in scare quotes because they're not necessarily easy gear locks. They can be challenging to navigate, but if you're comparing it to other gear locks, it is some of the easier gear locks out there. With that, you also get, let's see, there are 62 baddie and tyrant chips. Now, baddies, I didn't really go over, but as you progress throughout the day, you sometimes have to fight enemies. A bunch of those enemies are baddies, right? They consist of baddies. So there are a ton of different, different combinations right there. I think in the base box there's like 6 or 7 tyrants. I can't remember off the top of my head because I have everything mixed together. But it's a fair amount of tyrants, so you can do several different combinations there with enough cards, right? There's a lot of different day progressions. You probably won't have the same campaign twice in a row because the days will inevitably be different. The gear lock choice will be different. The tyrant choice will be different, right? There's a ton of different combinations there. So again, like I said, if you're looking for the most bang for your buck, this is probably it. Now, the reason I get a little hesitant, and actually there's seven tyrants. Now, the one thing or the biggest complaint about this that needs to be mentioned up front has to do with the way you construct your day cards. All right, so we talked a little bit about day cards. There is a special way to do day cards. In the base game of Too Many Bones, there's a day 1, a day 2, and a day 3. All right, your deck building is always going to consist of day 1, day 2, day 3, unless you're playing Undertow, which we'll get into later. In the core box, there is one day 1 card, one day 2 card, and one day 3 card. Okay, so your adventure every single time you play this game is going to be exactly the same for the first 3 days. Now, I know that already scares a lot of people right away, and it causes a lot of people to go out and kind of suggest one of the other expansions, which is Age of Tyranny, which comes with more of the day cards, and then they start adding that price in, and they go, oh my gosh, this game is suddenly getting a lot more expensive. But hear me out. You might not have to do that right away. A long while back, I wrote on BGG a question about this, and because I did a review on Too Many Bones. And I believe it was Josh Carlson responded that when they were designing the game, they wanted to have the feel of an epic RPG, right? Think of old school Final Fantasy. Well, when you play some of those old RPGs, no matter how you play the game, it always starts the same, right? You have to start in the town, and once you cross the bridge and you venture out into the world, then it expands, and you can go several different places. But the game itself always starts the same, and that's why they did this. And a lot of people see this as a detriment to the game, that, it makes the game not as good, it makes it not as exciting. But to be honest, I think it kind of helps a lot of new players to have day 1 through 3 be more basic cards. And the reason being is because there is a nice confidence boost with it, right? They're not exactly easy. One of the days, I won't mention anything because I don't want to spoil anything, but one of the days can sometimes be a challenge, right? Especially if you're playing on a harder difficulty, it can be a challenge. It's not a pushover day. So it can be a little challenging. I think it's nice to get yourself set up where, okay, you're built out your gear lock a little bit. You don't have to stress about early encounters. You can get through them. You can progress nicely. Start focusing on your gear lock build, and then the rest of the campaign will have all the challenges, and especially the tyrant, right? That's the main challenge we're looking at, is the tyrant. It's nice to go through an adventure that feels unique, feels different, all that fun stuff. But at the end of the day, really what you're trying to compete against is the tyrant at the end, just to be realistic. So a lot of people will suggest that you need Age of Tyranny right away, which would be another $30, which will raise the price up to $180. I don't think you do right away. I really don't. I think the game is fine for several dozen playthroughs with that standard day 1 through 2, or day 1, 2, and 3, the originals and ones that come with it. Now, I know a lot of experienced players will disagree with me that it gets boring fast. I get it, but I don't know. I played the game a lot. I think it's fine in that sense. So that's probably the biggest negative. And again, the gear locks and the tyrants are simpler. They're not simple when you first start, but once you kind of figure out how the game works, they are simpler. So that leads us into the second option of what we can do, which is Undertow. Now, Undertow was how I started this game, right? Because back at the time, the Undertow box was a bit cheaper. It wasn't $100. And at that time, I didn't know if I would love Too Many Bones. I didn't want to sink a ton of money into it. So I decided to start with a standalone expansion and see if I liked it. And this way it was a not as much loss of money if I didn't like it. So in Undertow, like I alluded to before, you get a day 1 card, a day 2 card, and then the rest of the days kind of go from there. So in the box, you get 2 gear locks. You get Stanza and Duster, yeah, which are some of my favorite gear locks. Stanza is one of the most unique gear locks, but these gear locks, maybe not Duster, but the Stanza especially is one of the more difficult gear locks to learn. So there is a higher learning curve with this game. There's also 6 tyrants in this game, if I'm not mistaken. They're all pretty good, pretty interesting fights. There's what's known as water fights. They change the game up a little bit. They make it pretty interesting. They are a lot of fun. But one of the other things I'll note is in this game, there are 4 day 1 cards and 4 day 2 cards. Okay. So you do have a bit more variety when it comes to day 1 and day 2, right? So if that's something that really concerns you, this might go a better route. Now, because of the amount of content in this game compared to price, it's not as much of a quote unquote bang for your buck as the base game of Too Many Bones is. It's just not. It is a cheaper price overall, so maybe that's something that appeals to you, but you are essentially paying more if you break it down on component lines. So there's also the ability in the Undertow box to play a mini campaign where you can kind of fight against one of the tyrants and then lead into a second tyrant, lead into a third tyrant, etc. There is a mini campaign to do that, but that's it's not something you have to do, but it is an option that's not available in the base game. So those are your 2 starting points as of right now. Again, if you got into Unbreakable and that's where your new starting point is, you could do that. I have no idea what it's going to be like. I assume it's going to be a pretty decent challenge. But yeah, so those are your 2 places to start. So after you get to those points, what should you do, right? Where do I go from here? And it kind of depends how you're feeling about the game. And this is where everything gets muddied and it's really hard to give exact recommendations for things, but I can give very general recommendations. A lot of times for Undertow, the thing people get bored of the most is playing the same 2 gear locks over and over, right? So a lot of people will recommend, oh, you should get other gear locks, right? So there's Ghillie, Nugget, Tink, Gasket, Dart, and Lab Rats. Now, the order I just said that in is probably the order you should get them. All right. Ghillie does make the game easier, but it's kind of nice to have a OP gear lock, for lack of a better word. And he's not too difficult to learn how to play. Nugget's not too difficult. Tink gets a little harder. Gasket isn't hard, but there's more moving parts. Dart can get weird with the way the mat flips. And Lab Rats is kind of a weird little concept, but it's fun. So if you're looking at to get the next gear lock, obviously get the one that interests you, but if you don't even know or they all seem interesting or whatever, I would go in that order. That's just me personally, but that's the order in which I would go. Now, if you're playing with the base game, I'm going to assume that the thing that bores you, for lack of a better word, the most is the day 1 through 3 thing. And if that's the case, you should get Age of Tyranny. It adds a whole campaign expansion, which you can do to link together a bunch of tyrants. Not a lot of people apparently do this. I enjoy it. It is a much longer game, and it's a game I have to break up through a series of nights. But you get 7 more day 1 cards, 7 more day 2 cards, 7 more day 3 cards. Now, at this point, you should probably get the other game, right? So if you got Too Many Bones, the base game, and you got Age of Tyranny, and you want more, you should probably get Undertow at this point. If you already at Undertow and got some expansions, you should probably get the base game. Now, you could do that sooner too, right? That's not the exact spot you have to get it. If you had Undertow and you're like, I want to dive all in, then obviously get the base game and just start collecting from there. But right around then is probably when you should have your rough crossover point, right? The games together can kind of work together. Really, it's just the gear locks that overlap. A lot of the day cards don't overlap. The encounter cards really don't overlap. But the tyrants and gear locks can alternate. So it's probably the next best place to go. Past that, 40 Days of Dolor adds more baddies to the game. You should probably get that at some point early on. I would add it either right if you're going the Too Many Bones route. I would probably add it right before you get Undertow or right around the same exact time. It just adds, again, more baddies to things. And I think it adds some cards too, if I'm not mistaken. But the main thing is that it adds more baddies to everything, and more encounter cards for true solo and for multiplayer. I guess the other thing to mention too, if you're a true solo player versus a multiplayer, if you play more than 2 players, Undertow isn't the way to go. You can only play Undertow with 2 players unless you buy more gear locks, right? Once you buy more gear locks, you can play Undertow multiplayer with 3 or 4 players. But if right off the bat you have a group of 4 that wants to play Too Many Bones, just probably go with the base game. It's just going to be cheaper. So that's all the general expansion stuff, except for Splice and Dice. Now, Splice and Dice takes the game to another level, in my opinion. It makes the game incredibly hard. The tyrants are really hard, but the systems in it are really amazing. They're really, really fun, but it probably is one of the later expansions you should get. It allows you to build your own tyrant. It has a whole tyrant mini game thing, which I don't do it too much of. I don't really care for it. But the build your own tyrant and the tyrants that come with it are very challenging. And this will be important of once you start kind of getting bored of the tyrants that are out there, right? You'll probably want to dive into this box. Now, that's most of the gameplay content. The only thing that's left is the automation of Shale, which is the recent pop-up book that just came out. I recently just played through the whole thing. It's basically a one campaign scenario, right? That you play through the pop-up book. It has a series of cards that you play through, day cards, right? So it's a series of cards. It's fun. It's enjoyable. It probably is one of the last things you should get, I would say, most likely, just because of the price and what it is. But it is fun. It's a fun expansion to go through. After that, we have a lot of cosmetic stuff. I'm going to start with the ally pack. This ally pack isn't really necessary at all. You have dice that can be used. But if you wanted to add Tink Spirebox or Gilly's Pets and wanted them like in chip form, this is what you would get. You have the adventure map, which I really like. It looks like this. It's 2-sided, right? Normal side, Undertow side. It's a pretty nice map. It's a nice way to keep track of things. It's not needed whatsoever for gameplay. It's just, it just looks pretty on the table. And last thing you have is the premium health chips. Now, when I first got into this game, I would never understand why anybody would want premium health chips. Surely the health chips that come with the game are good enough. Honestly, I love them. It's hard to imagine ever playing the game without premium health chips at this point. And it's really hard to explain why they're good until you actually move around a baddie or a gear lock with a lot of health. It just feels better. This game is a very tactile game, right? That's a huge part of it. It just feels better overall playing that way. And yeah, I think that's everything. I guess the last thing to really cover, or last 2 things to really cover, are the promos and the trove chest. Now, the promos come around generally pretty much every Black Friday. So I know a lot of people panic that they won't see it on the store right now. If you're looking at any other time besides Black Friday to, I think, about Christmas, that they won't see it on the store page and they'll freak out that they have to pay premium prices or anything like that. No, you just wait until Black Friday. You can get them. I think there's like a handful of packs at this point, 3 or 4 packs. Some of them have gameplay content. Some of it has cosmetic content. Some of it goes to Cloudspire or Hopplemakis or whatever. It's not necessary by any means, but they are fun to get. They are something you should probably get much later on. And then the last thing to talk about really is the trove chest. This is the big one. And it's not something I think you can get on the website normally. I think they run it randomly in campaigns. It's kind of hard to find right now because it's expensive. It's an expensive big box. And it is a nice way to store it. I have seen on BGG, there are people who have figured out how to use the old Too Many Bones, the big box, and the Undertow box to store pretty much everything. It is possible to store, if not everything, pretty much everything. And you can do it that way. The trove chest, I like it. It makes it easier, but it is a really expensive thing nowadays. Let's be honest. In the last Game Found campaign, I think it was selling for $150, which is a lot of money to spend for a storage system. It's nice. It's made of MDF. It's not going to be, just from my own personal experience and as a woodworker, it's not always going to be completely perfect. MDF can get dented and banged if it gets slightly wet. It's going to deteriorate. Some of the way they did the glue joints aren't my favorite way of doing them. But as far as a storage system, it works really, really well. So trove chest is probably the last thing I would get. It is not necessarily a luxury item, but there are ways to fit everything into those 2 boxes. They make it easier for traveling to game nights. The trophy chest isn't something I would carry around the game night, right? It's going to be a very heavy box. It's something I would keep very stationary, always in your house. And yeah, so you can get it. Probably should be the last thing you get. And it depends if it's even really available moving forward. And then I guess the very, very, very last thing is the lore books. You don't need, there's copies of them online, but if you do get them, they are nice. They are nice copies of books. They are pretty cool. And I think that's everything. I think we covered everything now. Maybe I'll update this video moving forward. When Unbreakable comes out. The last thing is the Gearlock Child. See, there's always more promo stuff, right? There's a ton of different stuff. The Gearlock Child is a small Gearlock expansion. It's basically to make the game easier for you. So if you're struggling really hard, it might be worth picking up and adding to your game. But that's really what it is. Like, it isn't a separate playable character. It's not, from what I remember, it's not guaranteed to show up in your games, but there's a good chance it shows up, right? So I guess that's another important note to make. So that's everything. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this helps slightly break it down, maybe. If not, leave a question down in the comments. As you scroll down in the comments, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe. I really appreciate it. But I don't want this video just to be about what I think. What do you all think? People that play Too Many Bones, what do you think the best order to purchase this content is? How did you end up going through this content? Did you just buy it all at once? Did you buy it in small chunks? I'm kind of interested. I'm interested in hearing that. And then the last thing I'll say is I want to know what people are excited for with Unbreakable. Like I said, as I'm making this video, Unbreakable hasn't come out yet. So I'm excited to hear what other people want with this game. There are a ton of expansions for it with 40 waves and 40 days, or no, 40 waves and Rage of Tyranny and all that fun stuff. I'm excited for all those different expansions to come out and add more to some of the older content. So anyway, appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I'll see you next time.